Alex, we're on.
Thank you, Eric.
You're welcome.
Hello, my name is Alex Cain, and this is Eric Getz. We are volunteers here at Minuteman National Historical Park. We are here in front of the Hartwell Tavern, which is a witness house to the events of April 19th, 1775. We are very excited to be talking with you today about some of the drinking habits and drinking cultures of 18th century New England. Eric?
Thanks, Alex. First thing we have to recognize is that early colonists drank a lot. Today, modern Americans drink about 2 gallons of pure alcohol a year. Back then, it was close to 6. And drinking was an all-day affair. They started in the morning with a drink they called an antiphlegmatic, which was just anything that had alcohol in it. They'd start their day with that and then continue drinking throughout the day. It was quite a scene, I imagine, back then, where everybody drinking in the fields, drinking at work. But, you know, they started because they all came from a culture where the water could kill you.
Really?
Yeah, and it was, you know, you could get anything from, if it didn't kill you, you could get a case of smallpox, lockjaw, and something they called the black vomit. So people went with alcohol to drink, and they used that as their staple throughout the day. And even as the Pilgrims came over in 1620, they loaded up the Mayflower with some water, but mostly beer. And like any good road trip, they were supposed to be a little bit farther south. They ended up in New England, or it's now New England, because basically they ran out of beer. And like any good road trip, once the beer's gone, the road trip's over. They were desperate for anything to drink, and they would do anything from spruce twigs, brewing that up, to making wine out of pumpkin, onions, tomatoes, beets. You can imagine beet wine. So it was quite a thing, but they were desperate for it. And finally, in 1634, 14 years after the Pilgrims got here, the first tavern opened up in Boston on the Shawmut Peninsula.
Well, shall we go inside and perhaps talk about a little drinking culture?
Let's go inside and drink.
All right. Let's go.
Apples, cider was a very important drink. However, in New England, there were no apple trees, so they had to bring them from Europe, and they began to plant them here. And as soon as they did, and they grew the apples, they would preserve their crops by creating this hard cider. And they would drink that all the time. It was very common for field workers to take the cider with them out into the field while they were doing the work and just drinking away. And it's one of the reasons when we hear about Johnny Appleseed, and he went and started planting all those apple trees. That wasn't just so you give your teacher a nice red apple at the beginning of the day. No, that was for the cider that people wanted and needed to drink.
So in 18th century New England taverns, when people got together for social gatherings and parties, there was a lot of drinking that was going on. In addition to toasts, many people would actually participate in drinking games. For example, this item here, which is referred to as a puzzle jug. Individuals would have to try and figure out how to get the contents of this container basically out to drink without pouring it out from the side. And it was a very popular game with 18th century New Englanders. On top of that, there were punch bowls. Punch bowls were actually not what you see today with large ladles where they would actually pour into the drinks. These were smaller bowls that were actually passed around to the guests. And guests were encouraged to drink from different types of bowls. You may have what is referred to as the collector's edition bowls, where guests were encouraged to drink from a set of bowls that had different generals inscribed on the bowl. Or they may actually have political messages as well, such as this bowl here. But many bowls actually had jokes inscribed on them. And often what you would see is the first half of the joke would be inscribed on the outer rim of the bowl, and then the answer to the joke would be down at the bottom of the bowl. And guests would be encouraged to drink until they could get to the bottom to see what the joke's answer was. Hence the term, the punchline. When a person would be visiting a tavern in 18th century New England, they would find a wide array of drinks being offered by the tavern keep. In the late 17th century, early 18th century, the typical drinks that were offered inside of a tavern were punch and flip. As the years would go by, including here at the Hartwell Tavern, more drinks were offered, including very popular drinks such as beer and cider. Now, when people would come to a tavern, this was a place where there was plenty of activity going on, a lot of events, and a lot of parties. And one of the central things of parties here in taverns were toasts. Now, when you think today of toast, a person may simply, to your health. But back in the 18th century, toasts were actually a sport sometimes, and people were expected to keep up. It wasn't uncommon to see such toasts maybe in the number of 10, or 20 toasts, or 45 toasts. In October of 1774, a Newburyport artillery company went to the William Tell Tavern after drilling. And by the end of the evening, a local newspaper reported that they had no less than 120 toasts. So what were some of the toasts that were actually offered during this time? They varied from political causes to religious causes to various other beliefs. So it was very common on the eve of the American Revolution that people here in Middlesex County at the Hartwell Tavern would be making toasts to the Provincial Congress. They would be making toasts to the Sons of Liberty. Or they may be making toasts to various political figures back in England and here at home. Up until 1776, many New Englanders continued to toast the King of England. But after 1776, they began to toast General Washington, other American generals, Lady Washington, and various political figures from England and France and Denmark that were supporting their cause. So while we are here in the Hartwell Tavern, I would like to offer you this toast to Congress.